Young brothers vanished during family hike. The words were carved into the collective memory of Eldridge Hollow, a small town nestled in the rugged folds of the Tarseth Mountains. In the summer of 2009, the Carver family, Elliot, Mara, and their sons, 12-year-old Theo and 8-year-old Levi, set out for a weekend trek along the serpentine trails of Blackthorn Ridge. It was meant to be a simple escape, a chance to trade the suffocating routine of daily life for the crisp, pine-scented air of the mountains. The family, frayed by Elliot's grueling hours at the lumber mill, and Mara's quiet, growing resentment, hoped the hike would mend their bonds. They packed backpacks with sandwiches, water bottles, and dreams of laughter by a campfire. Only two returned. Theo and Levi vanished somewhere in the dense forest, swallowed by mist-shrouded cliffs, leaving behind a single blue mitten, a scattering of broken twigs, and a mystery that would haunt Eldridge Hollow for 16 years. By the spring of 2025, the town had learned to live with its ghosts. The annual candlelight vigil for the Carver boys, once a gathering of hundreds with flickering flames lighting up the town square, had dwindled to a dozen loyal mourners, those who still remembered Theo's gap-toothed grin, or Levi's restless energy. The Carvers' story had become a cautionary tale, whispered to children who strayed too close to the woods. Stay on the path, or the ridge will take you too. But in April, during a routine renovation of Eldridge Park, workers unearthed a rusted time capsule, buried in 1997 by Troop 42, a local scout group. Inside, among faded letters, tarnished coins, and brittle Polaroids, was a yellowed note scrawled in a child's uneven hand. Theo and Levi Carver, forever brothers. The discovery sent a shockwave through the town, tearing open old wounds and igniting new questions. How had the names of two boys, not yet born in 1997, ended up in a capsule sealed 12 years before their disappearance? And what secrets had Blackthorn Ridge guarded all this time? Mara Carver stood at the edge of the freshly churned earth in Eldridge Park, her hands trembling as she clutched a photocopy of the note. The original was locked in an evidence bag at the sheriff's station, but this flimsy sheet felt heavier than her own heart. Her auburn hair, once a cascade of fire, was now streaked with gray, and her green eyes, still sharp, carried the exhaustion of a woman who had spent half her life chasing shadows. The crowd around her, townsfolk bundled in coats against the spring chill, reporters with microphones, and curious outsiders drawn by the headlines, murmured like a restless wind rustling through the pines. Mara didn't look at them. She couldn't. Her gaze was fixed on the hole where the capsule had been found, a raw scar in the grass, as if staring long enough might summon her boys back from the void. Mrs. Carver, any comment on the capsule's content? A young reporter, Jasper Cole from the Tarseth Tribune, thrust a digital recorder toward her. His boyish face was alight with ambition, his eyes glinting as if this story could be his ticket out of Eldridge Hollow's sleepy confines. Mara's lips tightened, her fingers curling around the photocopy until the edges crumpled, threatening to tear. "That's enough, Jasper," came a firm voice cutting through the murmurs. Sheriff Lena Voss stepped forward, her broad shoulders parting the crowd like a ship through fog. In her 50s, Lena had a face weathered by decades of patrolling the mountains, her dark hair pulled back in a tight braid that spoke of practicality over vanity. She'd been a deputy in 2009, one of the first to comb Blackthorn Ridge for the boys, her boots sinking into the mud as she called their names into the mist. The failure still gnawed at her, a quiet ache she carried like a bat. "Give her some space," Lena said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Jasper hesitated, his recorder still hovering, then backed off, joining the knot of reporters clustered near the park's gazebo, where a banner read Eldridge Park Renewal Project. Mara gave Lena a faint nod of thanks, but her attention returned to the note in her hands. Theo and Levi Carver, forever brothers. The handwriting wasn't theirs, she was certain of. Theo's letters were always precise, almost mechanical, a reflection of his love for puzzles, mazes, and the orderly click of Rubik's cubes. Levi's were chaotic, sprawling, full of loops and smudges from his restless hands, always itching to climb or build or break. This script was neither. It was deliberate, almost taunting, each letter formed with a care that felt mocking, as if the writer had known the pain it would inflict years later. "Mara," Lena said softly, her hand resting briefly on Mara's shoulder, "you don't have to stay here. I can drive you home." "I'm fine," Mara lied, her voice barely audible above the crowd's hum. She hadn't been fine since that day on the ridge, when the world had torn her sons from her grasp. She folded the photocopy with trembling fingers and slipped it into her coat pocket, where it nestled against her keys and a crumpled tissue. Who else knew about the capsule? Lena. Who could have put that note in there? Lena's jaw tightened, her eyes scanning the crowd with a cop's instinct. We're looking into it. The capsule was buried in '97 by Troop 42 as part of the town's centennial celebration. We've got the Scoutmaster's old records, but it's a long list. Kids, parents, volunteers, even some town officials who showed up for the ceremony. Could be any, or someone not even on the list, Mara said, her voice sharp with suspicion. She glanced across the park, where a group of older residents stood near a table laden with coffee urns and trays of donuts, their faces etched with a mix of pity and unease. Among them was Gideon Hale, the former Scoutmaster, now a stooped figure with silver hair and hands that shook slightly. As he gripped his cup, he caught Mara's eye for a fleeting moment, his pale blue eyes widening, then quickly looked away as if her gaze could peel back his secret. Mara drove home in silence, the photocopy burning a metaphorical hole in her pocket. Her small house on Juniper Lane, once filled with the chaos of two boys, Legos scattered across the floor, muddy sneakers by the door, Levi's off-key singing, was now a museum of absence. The living room walls still held their photos. Theo at 10, proudly holding a model rocket he built. Levi at 6, grinning with a missing front tooth, his face smeared with blueberry pie. Mara avoided looking at them as she sank into a chair at the kitchen table, spreading the photocopy before her like a map to nowhere. The house was too quiet, as it had been for years. Elliot had left a decade ago, unable to bear the silence or the guilt. He'd moved to a coastal town in Oregon, where the ocean's roar drowned out his thoughts. He sent occasional letters, stiff and formal, filled with updates about his job at a fishery and vague promises to visit. Mara rarely opened them, letting them pile up in a drawer. She didn't blame him for leaving. She'd wanted to run too, but she couldn't. Not while her boys were still out there, somewhere in some form. The kitchen clock ticked, each second a reminder of the years stolen from her. She traced the words on the note again, her fingers lingering on Theo and Levi. The paper felt fragile, as if it might crumble under her touch, but it held secrets she couldn't yet unravel. A knock at the door startled her, sharp and insistent. She rose, peering through the peephole to see a woman in her 30s, with dark curls and a nervous smile. It was Ivy Wren, the local librarian who'd been a teenager in 2009, just a high school sophomore when the Carvers vanished. Ivy had always been kind, slipping Mara novels and poetry collections during those early sleepless years, when grief was a physical weight, a stone lodged in her chest. They hadn't spoken in months, but now Ivy stood on the porch, clutching a small cardboard box, her breath visible in the chilly evening air. "Mara, I hope I'm not intruding," Ivy said when Mara opened the door. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic, but her brown eyes were bright with purpose, like someone who'd stumbled onto something significant. "I heard about the capsule, and I found something in the library archives. I thought you should see it." Mara's pulse quickened, a flicker of hope igniting despite her better judgment. She ushered Ivy inside, clearing a space on the table cluttered with unopened mail, half-finished coffee mugs, and a wilted potted plant she kept forgetting to water. Ivy set the box down and opened it, revealing a stack of yellowed papers and a small leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and faded. "These are from Troop 42's records," Ivy explained, her fingers brushing the journal's worn edges. "They were donated years ago after the troop disbanded in the early 2000s. Most of it's mundane camp schedules, badge requirements, lists of canned goods for food drives. But this journal belonged to one of the scouts. His name was Rowan Taylor." Mara frowned, the name unfamiliar, like a pebble in a stream she couldn't place. "Who was he?" "He was in the troop that buried the capsule in '97, Ivy said, opening the journal to a page near the back. "He was a quiet kid, maybe 14 at the time. Moved away a few years later, around 2000, when his family left town. But look at this." She pointed to a list of names written in faded blue ink, the handwriting uneven but deliberate. Among them, unmistakable, were Theo Carver and Levi Carver. Mara's breath caught in her throat, a cold wave washing over her. She leaned closer, her eyes scanning the page, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure Ivy could hear it. The handwriting matched the note from the capsule. Nothing like her boy's scrawl. This was written, she asked, her voice trembling. 12 years before they vanished. Ivy nodded, her expression troubled, her fingers twisting a curl nervously. I don't know what it means, Mara. Maybe it's a coincidence. Or maybe Rowan knew something. I thought you'd want to see it before I took it to Sheriff Foss. Mara's fingers traced the names in the journal, her mind racing. Her boys hadn't even existed, and Theo was born in December of that year. A winter baby who'd arrived 2 weeks late, his cries echoing through the hospital ward. Levi came in 2001, a summer child with a laugh that could light up a room. How could their names be here in a stranger's hand, penned before they'd taken their first breaths? Where's Rowan Tate now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, Ivy admitted, tucking the curl behind her ear. I tried looking him up, social media, public records, voter rolls, anything. There's no trace of him online. It's like he vanished too. Mara's hands tightened around the journal, her nails digging into the leather. She thanked Ivy, promising to call if she found anything, and saw her out. Alone again, she sat with the journal open, staring at the names until her eyes burned. The house seemed to close in around her, the walls whispering memories of her boys. Theo reading adventure novels under the covers, with a flashlight. Levi building forts out of couch cushions. She closed the journal and pressed it to her chest, as if it could bring them closer. The next morning, Mara drove to the sheriff's station, the journal tucked securely in her bag. The station was a squat brick building at the edge of town, its parking lot dotted with patrol cars and a rusted bicycle chained to a pole. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and old paper, a testament to the years spent chasing dead ends. Lena was at her desk, surrounded by files from the 2009 case, her coffee mug leaving rings on a topographic map of Blackthorn Ridge. The walls were lined with maps, their edges curling, marked with faded pins where search teams had scoured the trails. 16 years ago, a bulletin board held photos from the search volunteers in orange vests, dogs sniffing the underbrush, a helicopter hovering over the cliffs. Mara, you look like you haven't slept, Lena said, gesturing to a chair across from her. Her voice was gentle, but her eyes were wary, as if she sensed the storm Mara was about to unleash. Mara handed her the journal and recounted Ivy's discovery, her words tumbling out in a rush. Lena's brow furrowed as she read the list of names, her fingers pausing on Theo and Levi. Rowan Tate, she murmured, leaning back in her chair. I remember him vaguely, scrawny kid, always sketching in that notebook of his. Kept to himself, didn't talk much. His family left town around 2000, I think. His dad got a job in another state, Idaho maybe. Can you find him? Mara asked, her voice urgent, her hands gripping the edge of the desk. He wrote their names, Lena. He knew something. Lena sighed, rubbing her temples, her braid fraying at the edges. I'll have my deputies dig into it. We'll check old addresses, see if we can track him down. But Mara, this journal doesn't prove anything. It could be a prank, a coincidence. A coincidence. Mara's voice rose, sharp enough to make a nearby deputy glance up from his desk, his pen pausing over a report. My boys' names, written 12 years before they were born, in a capsule buried by a kid who disappears. That's not a coincidence, Lena. Lena held up a hand, her expression firm but not unkind. I'm not saying it's nothing. I'm saying we need to be careful. I'll look into Rowan, but I need to know more about the capsule itself. Who had access to it before it was buried? Mara leaned forward, her eyes searching Lena's face. What have you found so far? Lena hesitated, then pulled a file from the stack, its edges worn from years of handling. The capsule was buried in '97, during a Troop 42 ceremony, part of the town's centennial celebration. Gideon Hale was the scoutmaster then. He says the scouts filled it with letters, drawings and trinkets during a meeting at the community center. It was stored there for a week before the burial, locked in a storage room, but the lock was cheap. Gideon admitted it could have been picked with a paperclip. Anyone could have slipped something in. Janitor, parent, random visitor. Mara's stomach twisted, a knot of dread tightening. So it could have been planned. Someone knew my boys would vanish, years before it happened. Let's not jump to conclusions, Lena said, though her tone lacked conviction. She closed the file and met Mara's gaze. I'll call in some favors, see if we can track down Rowan Tate.
I'll also pull the community center's old visitor logs, if they still exist. In the meantime, Mara, be careful who you talk to about this. Folks in Eldridge are already spooked. This capsule stirred up old fears. People are talking about curses, ghosts, all kinds of nonsense. Mara nodded, but as she left the station, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Across the street, Jasper Cole leaned against his car, a beat-up sedan with a Tarseth Tribune sticker on the bumper. He was scribbling in a notebook, his pen moving furiously, but when he saw her, he waved, his smile sharp and calculating, like a predator catching a scent. Mara quickened her pace, her hand instinctively checking the journal in her bag. Over the next few days, Mara threw herself into her own investigation, unable to sit still while Lena's deputies chased leads. She visited the library, where Ivy helped her comb through microfilm of old newspapers and dusty town records stored in the basement, a damp space lit by flickering fluorescents. They found little about Rowan Tate, just a brief mention in a 1998 issue of the Tarseth Tribune about him winning a local art contest for a charcoal drawing of Blackthorn Ridge, described as hauntingly vivid. There was also a grainy photo from a scout camp, dated 1997, where Rowan stood at the edge of the group, his face half hidden by a hood. Mara couldn't stop staring at his eyes. They were dark, almost hollow, as if he'd seen something he couldn't unsee. Ivy, sensing Mara's unease, offered to keep digging, but the library's records were sparse and online searches yielded nothing but dead ends. No social media, no LinkedIn, no trace of Rowan Tate in the digital age.
Meanwhile, Eldridge Hollow buzzed with theories, the capsule's discovery fueling gossip at every corner. At the Pineview Diner, where Mara grabbed coffee to fuel her late nights, she overheard snippets of conversation. Some said the note was a prank, slipped into the capsule by a bored teenager. Others whispered about curses, pointing to Blackthorn Ridge's grim history. In the 1970s, a hiker named Clara Voss, Lena's aunt, had vanished on the same trail. Her backpack found weeks later near a cliff, its straps tangled in briars with no sign of her body. In the 1980s, a logger named Amos Reed disappeared, leaving only his axe embedded in a tree, its handle slick with sap. In the 1990s, a pair of teenagers, Layla and Caleb Morrow, went missing during a camping trip, their tent found slashed open, their belongings scattered. The ridge seemed to have a hunger, a knack for swallowing those who wandered too far, and the capsule's note had revived those old fears. Mara's evenings were spent at the Rusty Anchor, Eldridge's only bar, a dimly lit dive with sticky floors and a jukebox that played the same Johnny Cash songs on loop. She sat in a corner booth, nursing a glass of water, listening to locals swap tales over beers and whiskey. The bar was a microcosm of the town, loggers in flannel, retirees with weathered hands, young couples escaping the monotony of small-town life. One night, she overheard Gideon Hale, his voice slurred from too many drinks, talking to a group of old-timers at the bar. That capsule was supposed to stay buried, he said, his hands shaking as he gripped his glass, whiskey sloshing over the rim. We never should have dug it up. It's like poking a sleeping bear, waking something that ought to stay asleep. Mara's heart quickened, a spark of suspicion flaring. She slid into the booth across from him, ignoring the curious looks from his companions, a trio of gray-haired men who smelled of pipe tobacco and motor oil. Gideon, she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. What do you know about the capsule? Gideon blinked at her, his face paling beneath his gray stubble, his eyes bloodshot. Mara, I didn't mean nothing by it. Just an old man rambling. You know how it is. You were there when it was buried. She pressed, leaning closer, her hands flat on the table. Did you see anyone tampering with it? Anyone acting strange? Gideon's hands shook harder, and he set his glass down, spilling a few drops onto the scarred wood. I don't know. It was chaotic. Kids running around, parents arguing about whose letter got to go in first, who got to write the official message for the future. I didn't watch the capsule every sec. He paused, his eyes darting to the bar's exit, then added, his voice dropping to a whisper, but Rowan Tate, he was always sneaking off. Said he was drawing, but I never saw no sketches. Kid gave me the creeps, always staring at the woods like he heard something calling him. Mara's pulse raced, her breath catching, Did you tell the sheriff this? Gideon shook his head, his shoulders slumping. Didn't think it mattered. Still don't. Rowan was just a kid. Mara, leave it be. You're stirring up things best left alone. Mara wanted to press him further, but Gideon's friends stepped in. One of them, a burly man named Hank, with a logger's build, muttering, "Let the man drink in peace, Mara." She retreated to her booth. Her mind churned. Gideon's words echoed Rowan's name, tying him tighter to the mystery. But they also hinted at something darker, something about the ridge itself, that made her skin crawl. A week later, Lena called Mara to the station. Her voice clipped over the phone. The sheriff's office was quieter now, the initial frenzy of the capsule's discovery giving way to a grim routine of paperwork and dead-end leads. Lena looked tired, her braid fraying dark circles under her eyes, but her voice was steady as she gestured Mara to a chair. "We found Rowan Tate," she said, her expression grim. "Or at least we think we did. He's going by Rowan Kessler now, living in a small town in Montana called Bitterroot Creek. Changed his name legally. I spoke to the local sheriff there. He's a recluse, lives in a cabin outside town, doesn't talk to anyone." "Is he coming here?" Mara asked, her hands tightening around her bag, her nails digging into her palms. Lena shook her head, her lips thinning. "He says he doesn't remember anything about the capsule or Eldridge. Claims he was just a kid. Doesn't know why his journal has those names. But I'm sending a deputy to question him in person. Mara, I need you to stay out of this. If Rowan's hiding something, we'll find it." Mara nodded, but her mind was already racing, a plan forming before Lena finished speaking. She couldn't wait for deputies or reports, not when every day felt like a step further from her boy. That night, she booked a flight to Missoula, Montana, using the last of her savings, a small nest egg she'd once hoped to use for Theo's college fund. She didn't tell anyone, not Lena, not Ivy, not even her neighbor Mrs. Delaney, who'd been feeding her cat for years. She packed a bag, slipping the journal, the photocopy of the capsule note, and a flashlight inside, and left a brief note on the kitchen counter. "Gone for a few days. Please water the plant." The flight to Montana was turbulent, the plane rattling as it crossed the Rockies, the seatbelt sign flickering on and off. Mara barely noticed, her thoughts consumed by Rowan Tate, or Kessler, as he called himself now. What had he known why had he written her son's name? And why had he fled Eldridge, changing his name and erasing his past? The questions churned in her mind, each one sharper than the last, like shards of glass she couldn't stop touching. She landed in Missoula at dusk, the sky a bruised purple over the mountains, the air sharp with the promise of spring snow. She rented a car, a compact sedan, that smelled of air freshener and cigarette smoke, and drove 3 hours to Bitterroot Creek, a town so small it consisted of a single gas station, a diner and a post office. Rowan's cabin was a mile outside the town limits, hidden among towering cedars along a dirt road that tested the car's suspension, gravel pinging against the undercarriage. Mara's heart pounded as she parked at the edge of his property, the headlights cutting through the gathering dark, illuminating a path overgrown with ferns. The cabin was small, its wood weathered and streaked with moss, the roof sagging under the weight of years. A single window glowed with faint light, like a beacon in the wilderness. Mara approached, her boots crunching on gravel, her breath visible in the chilly air. She knocked, the sound sharp in the silence. No answer. She knocked again, louder, her knuckles stinging. "Rowan, I'm Mara Carver. I need to talk to you." A shadow moved behind the window, slow and deliberate, like a predator sizing up its prey. The door creaked open, revealing a man in his 40s with a gaunt face, gray-streaked hair, and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of decades. They were the same eyes from the scout photo, dark, haunted, as if they'd seen too much. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and rough like gravel underfoot. Mara held up the journal, her hands steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I know about this. You wrote my son's names, Theo and Levi Carver. Why?" Rowan's expression didn't change, but his hands twitched at his sides, betraying his unease. "I don't know what you're talking about. Leave or I'll call the sheriff." "You wrote their names 12 years before they were born," Mara said, her voice rising, cracking with desperation. "They vanished in 2009 on Blackthorn Ridge. Tell me what you know." Rowan stepped back, his eyes darting to the journal, a flicker of recognition breaking through his stoic mask. For a moment she thought he might slam the door, but instead he sighed, the sound heavy with resignation, like a man surrendering to a long-dreaded fate. "Come inside," he said, "but you won't like what you hear." The cabin was sparse, with a single wooden chair, a cot pushed against the wall, and a desk cluttered with sketches, charcoal stubs and empty coffee mugs. The air smelled of wood smoke, damp earth, and something faintly metallic, like old coin. Mara sat, clutching the journal, as Rowan paced, his movements restless, like a caged animal. "I didn't want to remember Eldridge," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I left for a reason." "What?" Mara asked, her eyes never leaving his face, searching for a crack in his guarded demeanor. Rowan stopped, his gaze distant, as if he were seeing something far beyond the cabin's walls. "Blackthorn Ridge. It's not just a place. It's alive. In a way. It takes things. People. I saw it when I was a kid." Mara's skin prickled, a chill running down her spine, her fingers tightening around the journal. "Saw what?" Rowan hesitated, then pulled a sketch from the desk, his hands trembling as he smoothed it out. It was done in charcoal, the lines jagged and urgent, depicting a cliff shrouded in mist, with two small figures standing at the edge. One wore a blue mitten, its color vivid against the grayscale, a single star pattern etched into the fabric. Mara's heart stopped, her breath catching in her throat. "That's Theo's mitten," she whispered, her voice breaking, tears welling in her eyes. "I drew this in '97, Rowan said, his voice low, his hands shaking as he set the sketch down. "I didn't know why. I just saw it in my head, like a dream I couldn't shake. I wrote their names because they were in my head too, Theo and Levi. I didn't know they were real until years later, when I heard about the disappearance." Mara's hands shook as she touched the sketch, her fingers tracing the mitten, its star pattern unmistakable. Theo had begged for that mitten, a bright blue one he'd seen in a store window, because it matched his favorite jacket, a hand-me-down from his cousin. "You're saying you predicted it?" she asked, her voice barely audible, her mind struggling to grasp the impossible. "I don't know," Rowan said, his voice cracking, his eyes wild with fear. "I don't want to believe it. But the ridge, it's taken others." Clara Voss, Lena's aunt. "She used to talk about it too." "Clara?" Mara frowned, her mind racing, trying to piece together the fragments. "What does she have to do with this?" Rowan sat across from her, his hands clasped tightly, his knuckles white. "She was my counselor at scout camp, and she'd tell us stories about the ridge, how it whispered to her, showed her things. Visions, she called them. She said it showed her a cave, a light, symbols carved in stone. I thought she was just crazy, spinning tales to scare us. But then I started seeing things too. After she vanished in '97, I drew that sketch." He pointed to the cliff drawing, his hand unsteady. "I burned most of my sketches after that. But I couldn't destroy that one." Mara's mind reeled, the cabin seeming to tilt around her. She wanted to dismiss it as madness, a troubled man's delusions. But the sketch, the mitten, the names, it was too precise to be coincidence. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" she demanded, her voice sharp with frustration, her hands slamming the journal onto the desk. "I was a kid," Rowan said, his eyes pleading, his voice breaking. "Who'd believe me? My parents thought I was troubled, sent me to a shrink who prescribed pills I never took. I tried to forget. I burned the sketches, changed my name, left. But it never left me." Mara spent the night on Rowan's cot, too shaken to drive, her mind a storm of questions and fear. He showed her more sketches, kept in a locked box under his bed, the key hidden in a tin of fishing lures, dozens of them, each more unsettling than the last. Some depicted Blackthorn Ridge, its cliffs and pines rendered in haunting detail, the mist almost palpable on the page. Others showed strange symbols, spirals, jagged lines, shapes that seemed to pulse, as if alive. One sketch stood out, a cave, its entrance obscured by vines, with a light glowing from within, soft and eerie. "I've never been there," Rowan said, his voice hollow, his eyes fixed on the drawing. "But I keep drawing it, over and over, like it's calling me." As dawn broke, painting the sky a pale gold through the cabin's window,
Mara made a plan. She'd take the sketches back to Eldridge, show them to Lena. She'd find that cave, if it existed, and search for answers. But as she packed her bag, Rowan grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong, his fingers cold against her skin. "If you go back to the ridge, be careful," he said, his eyes wild with fear. "It knows you're looking for it." Back in Eldridge, Mara handed the sketches to Lena at the sheriff's station, the air thick with the scent of coffee and dust. Lena studied them, her expression a mix of skepticism and unease, her fingers tracing the symbols as if they might reveal their meaning through time. "This is disturbing," she said, spreading the drawings across her desk, the charcoal smudging her fingertips. "But it doesn't prove anything. Rowan could have made it all up." He was a troubled kid, by all accounts. His school records show he was disciplined for fights, for drawing inappropriate images in class. "Then find the cave," Mara said, pointing to the sketch with the glowing entrance, her voice steady despite the exhaustion weighing her down. "If it's real, it's a lead." Lena sighed, rubbing her eyes, her braid unraveling at the ends. "I'll organize a team to search the ridge." "But Mara, don't get your hopes up. The ridge is huge, miles of trails, cliffs, ravines, most of it unmapped. Even if this cave exists, it could take weeks to find it." "I don't have weeks," Mara said, her voice trembling, her hands clenching into fists. "I've waited 16 years. Lena's expression softened, but her voice was firm, a sheriff's authority cutting through her empathy. "I know, but you need to let us handle this. Stay away from the ridge, until we're ready." Mara nodded, but her mind was already elsewhere, a plan forming in the quiet spaces of her resolve. She had no intention of waiting. That night she packed her hiking gear, sturdy boots, a flashlight with fresh batteries, a knife she'd bought years ago for camping, a map of Blackthorn Ridge, marked with Rowan's sketch as a guide. She called Ivy, her voice calm but resolute, asking her to keep the journal safe. "I'm going to the ridge," she said, cutting off Ivy's protests. "Mara, that's crazy," Ivy said, her voice rising with panic, the phone crackling with her urgency. "Wait for Lena. You can't go alone. It's dangerous. You know what's happened." "I've waited long enough," Mara said, her words heavy with finality. "I'm done waiting." The trail to Blackthorn Ridge was overgrown, the path faded by years of neglect, its markers rusted metal posts, swallowed by moss, or toppled by storm. Mara drove to the trailhead at dawn, her car bouncing over ruts, the forest looming ahead like a wall of secrets. She parked, shouldered her pack, and stepped onto the trail, her flashlight beam cutting through the fog that clung to the ground like a living thing. The air was thick, almost suffocating, heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine. The pines themselves seemed to lean closer with each step she took, their branches whispering secrets she couldn't decipher, their needles brushing her arms like ghostly fingers. Mara moved carefully, her boots sinking into the soft earth, her map clutched in one hand, Rowan's sketch in the other. The trail wound upward, through groves of pine and cedar, past boulders etched with initials from long ago hikers. The fog thickened, muffling her footsteps, making the world feel smaller, more treacherous. She checked the map frequently, her fingers tracing the path to the cliff's edge, where the cave was drawn. But the ridge was vast, its labyrinth of trails a maze of dead ends and false leads. Hours passed, and doubt crept into her heart, a quiet voice whispering that maybe Rowan was delusional, that maybe she was too, chasing a madman's fantasy. Her legs ached, her jacket burned, the cold seeping through her jacket, but she pressed on, driven by a need she couldn't name, a mother's instinct that refused to let go. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the forest in shades of twilight, Mara pushed through a curtain of vines, her heart pounding as she caught sight of something, a narrow cave entrance, half hidden by moss and ferns, exactly as Rowan had drawn. Her breath caught in her throat, a sob threatening to escape. She stepped closer, her flashlight revealing jagged stone, slick with moisture, the air growing colder with each step. Inside, a faint glow pulsed from within, like a heartbeat in the darkness, soft and eerie, just like in the sketch. Mara took a deep breath, her hand tightening around the flashlight, its beam flickering as if struggling against the shadows. The air grew colder now, her breath visible, her heart a drumbeat of fear and hope. She stepped into the cave, the walls closing around her, narrow and slick, the ceiling low, forcing her to duck. The glow intensified, guiding her deeper, and the walls seemed to hum with a low, almost human sound, a murmur that raised the hairs on her neck. She followed the light, her flashlight flickering erratically, its beam cutting through the gloom. Then she saw it, a small carved stone embedded in the cave floor, its surface etched with the spiral symbols from Rowan's sketches, their lines sharp and precise, as if freshly made. Beside it lay a child's shoe, scuffed and weathered, its red laces frayed but intact, unmistakably Levi's, the shoe he'd worn the day they vanished, the one he'd tied with a clumsy knot she'd helped him redo. Mara's knees buckled, and she sank to the ground, her hands trembling as she reached for the shoe, tears streaming down her face, blurring her vision. The cave seemed to spin around her, the hum growing louder, more insistent. Before she could touch the shoe, the ground shook violently, a low rumble that echoed through the stone, dust falling from the ceiling. The glow flared, blinding her, a white-hot searing light that burned her eye. A voice not hers, not human, whispered her name, cold and sharp as a blade, slicing through her thoughts.
The voice coiled through the cave, a tendril of ice that wrapped around Mara Carver's heart. Mara, it whispered, not from any single point but from the walls, the air, pulsing glow that suffused the cavern. Her hand froze inches from Levi's shoe, her breath ragged, her pulse a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. The carved stone with its spiral symbols hummed beneath her, its vibrations seeping through her knees pressed against the cold, damp floor. The light flared again, blinding, then dimmed, revealing shadows that danced like half-formed figures at the edge of her vision. She gripped her flashlight, its beam now steady but faint, as if the cave were siphoning its power. Fear clawed at her, a primal urge to flee. But the sight of Levi's shoe, small, scuffed, achingly real, anchored her. She was close. Her boys were here, or had been. She couldn't turn back now, not after 16 years of searching, of carrying their absence like a stone in her chest. Who's there? Mara's roars cracked, echoing faintly before being swallowed by the cave's depths. No answer came, only the hum, low and insistent, like a heartbeat older than the Tarseth Mountains themselves. She reached for the shoe again, her fingers brushing the frayed red laces, and a memory surged. Levi at 7, sitting cross-legged on their porch in Eldridge Hollow, struggling to tie his shoes, his tongue poking out in concentration. She'd knelt beside him, guiding his small hands, their laughter mingling with the summer breeze, the scent of pine drifting from the nearby woods. The memory was a blade sharp and sweet, slicing through her defenses. Tears blurred her vision as she gripped the shoe, pressing it to her chest, its worn leather cold against her skin. The ground trembled, a deep rumble that sent pebbles raining from the ceiling, dusting her hair and shoulder. Mara staggered to her feet, clutching the shoe and flashlight, her eyes darting to the cave's deeper recesses. The glow pulsed from a narrow passage ahead, its light beckoning like a siren's call, both alluring and menacing. She hesitated, Rowan Tate's warning echoing in her mind. It knows you're looking for it. Blackthorn Ridge, with its history of vanishings, Clara Voss, Amos Reed, the Morrow twins, had a hunger, a presence Rowan had feared. And now Mara felt it too, a weight in the air, watching. But she'd come too far to stop. Her boys were out there, or their truth was, and she'd face whatever this cave held to find it. She stepped forward, the passage tightening around her, the walls slick with moisture, the air growing colder, heavier as if she were descending into the earth's core. The passage twisted, its walls narrowing until her shoulders brushed stone, the flashlight's beam bouncing off glistening surfaces. The hum grew louder, vibrating through her bones, and the glow intensified, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move independently of her life. Her breath came in shallow gasps, the air thick with a metallic tang, like blood or rust. The passage opened abruptly into a larger chamber, its walls towering above her, etched with symbols, spirals, jagged lines, shapes that seemed to shift when she looked too long, as if alive. In the center stood a stone altar, rough-hewn and ancient, its surface stained with dark patches that made her stomach churn. Blood she knew instinctively, though whose or how old, she couldn't guess. The glow emanated from above, where a crack in the ceiling let in a strange, ethereal light. Not sunlight but something otherworldly, like starlight trapped in stone, pulsing in time with the hum. On the altar lay a small object, its color vivid against the gray stone. A blue mitten, its star pattern unmistakable. Theo's mitten. The one found on Blackthorn Ridge in 2009. The only trace of him left behind after the search team scoured the trail. Now it was here, impossibly preserved, its fabric soft and unweathered as if it had been placed there yesterday. Mara's breath hitched, a sob tearing from her throat. She stumbled to the altar, her hands shaking as she touched the mitten, its texture achingly familiar. "Theo," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Levi, where are you?" The cave answered with silence, but the hum grew louder, a chorus of unseen voices resonating through the chamber. She scanned the room, her flashlight sweeping the shadows, searching for any sign of her boys, a footprint, a scrap of clothing, anything to prove they'd been here. The walls seemed to close in, the symbols pulsing in sync with the light, and a wave of dizziness hit her, forcing her to lean against the altar. Her fingers brushed something else, a small leather-bound book tucked into a crevice in the stone, its cover cracked and faded, like Rowan's journal but older, its edges brittle with age. She pulled it free, her hands trembling, and opened it to find pages filled with childish scrawl, frantic drawings and lists of names. Her heart stopped as she recognized the handwriting from the capsule note, the same uneven script that had haunted her since the park's discovery. Among the names were Theo Carver and Levi Carver, written repeatedly, as if the writer were obsessed, their letters growing shakier with each iteration. Other names appeared too: Clara Voss, Amos Reed, Lila Morrow, Caleb Morrow, all people who'd vanished on Blackthorn Ridge over the decades, their stories woven into Eldridge Hollow's grim tapestry. The final page held a single sentence, scrawled in red ink that glistened as if still wet: "The ridge keeps what it takes." Mara's hands shook as she read, her mind reeling. This journal wasn't Rowan's. It was older. The paper yellowed, the ink faded in places, as if written long before. Who had penned this? And why were her boys' names here, alongside the ridge's other victims, in a book that predated their births? She tucked the journal into her pack, her resolve hardening, despite the fear gnawing at her. She needed to get out, to show this to Sheriff Lena Voss, to find answers. But as she turned to leave, the glow flared again, and the voice returned, louder now, almost human, its tone achingly familiar. "They're here," it said, and Mara froze, her blood turning to ice. The voice was young, male, an echo of her youngest son's laughter. "Mom, we're here." "Levi." Mara spun, her flashlight beam slicing through the dark, her voice a desperate cry that echoed off the walls. "Theo, where are you?" The chamber was empty, but the voice came again, softer, from the shadows at the far end. "Mom, don't leave." Tears streamed down her face as she stumbled toward the sound, her flashlight flickering, the glow above pulsing wildly, casting the symbols into stark relief. The shadows seemed to solidify, forming shapes, two small figures, one taller, one smaller, standing at the chamber's edge. Their faces were blurred, like figures in a dream, but the taller one wore a jacket she recognized, blue with a star patch on the sleeve, the one Theo had worn the day they hiked. The smaller one held out a hand, his fingers curled as if reaching for her, his silhouette unmistakably Levi's with his restless, eager posture. "No," Mara sobbed, her knees buckling, her pack slipping from her shoulder. "You're not real. You can't." But she moved toward them, her heart overriding her mind, her feet carrying her across the stone floor. The figures didn't move, their forms wavering like heat mirages, but their voices grew clearer, overlapping, pleading, a chorus of her boy's childhood. "Stay with us, Mom. Don't go." Mara reached out, her fingers brushing empty air, and the figures dissolved, the glow dimming, the hum fading to a whisper. She sank to the ground, clutching the mitten and shoe, her sobs echoing in the chamber, raw and guttural. They weren't real. She knew it, deep in her bones, but the pain was searing and relentless, as if she'd lost them all over again. She curled into herself, the cave's cold seeping into her, and for a moment, she wanted to stay, to let the ridge take her too, if it meant being with her boys, even in illusion. But a memory surfaced, unbidden. Theo at 12, solving a puzzle she'd thought impossible. His eyes bright with triumph as he held up the completed Rubik's Cube. Levi at 8, hugging her after a nightmare, his small arms fierce with trust, his voice muffled against her shoulder. You make the monsters go away, Mom. They'd want her to fight, to live, to find the truth, not to surrender to this place's hunger. She wiped her tears, her hands shaking, and forced herself to stand, her legs trembling like a newborn foal. She grabbed her pack, the journal, the mitten, and the shoe, and retraced her steps through the passage, the walls seeming tighter now, the air thicker, as if the cave were reluctant to release her. The journey back was a blur of fear and exhaustion. The passage seemed longer, its twists sharper, the hum following her like a shadow. She emerged into the night, the fog thicker, the moon hidden, the forest silent except for the rustle of pine. Her flashlight died halfway down the trail, forcing her to navigate by touch and memory, her hands brushing tree trunks, her boots sinking into mud. Branches snagged her jacket, roots tripped her, but she pressed on, driven by the weight of the artifacts in her pack. She reached her car at dawn, her hands raw from gripping bark, her face streaked with dirt and tears. She drove to Eldridge Hollow, the journal, mitten, and shoe beside her, her resolve a fragile thread holding her together against the grief threatening to unravel her. At the sheriff's station, Mara sat across from Lena, the artifacts spread on the desk like relics from a forgotten war. The journal lay open to the page of names, the mitten and shoe beside it, their colors vivid against the station's drab gray. Rowan's sketches were there too, their symbols matching those in the cave, a chilling confirmation of his visions. Lena listened in stunned silence as Mara recounted her ordeal, her voice steady despite the exhaustion, etching lines into her face. The sheriff's office was quiet, the morning light filtering through dusty blinds, casting stripes across the maps of Blackthorn Ridge pinned to the walls. Mara, this is beyond anything we've dealt with, Lena said, her voice low, her hands clasped tightly on the desk. Her braid was frayed, her eyes shadowed, but her gaze was steady, a cop's resolve tempered by years of facing the Ridge's mysteries. I believe you saw what you saw, but we need to be careful. This cave, these symbols, it's not just a missing persons case anymore. It's something older, stranger. Mara nodded, her hands gripping the chair's arms, her nails digging into the worn wood. What about the journal? The names? It's not Rowan's, it's too old. Someone else knew about my boys, about all the other. Lena flipped through the journal, her brow furrowing as she studied the scrawl. These names, Clara, Amos, the Morrows, they're all connected to the Ridge. Clara was my aunt. You know, her disappearance broke my mom's heart, pushed me to become a cop. I'll send a team to the cave, get experts to analyze this journal, the symbols, the altar. But Mara, you need to rest. You look like you're about to collapse. I can't rest, Mara said, her voice breaking, a tear slipping down her cheek. Not until I know what happened to that cave. It showed me their faces, Lena. It spoke in their voices. I know it wasn't real, but it felt like them. Lena's expression softened, a rare crack in her professional armor. I know, I've lost people to that Ridge too, but you're no good to anyone if you burn out. Go home, sleep. I'll call you the moment we find anything. Mara relented, too exhausted to argue, her body aching from the hike, her mind numb from the cave's assault. She drove home, the artifacts locked in a box in her trunk, their presence a quiet comfort, and a relentless reminder. Her house on Juniper Lane was dark, the silence oppressive. As she stepped inside, she placed the box on the kitchen table, beside the photocopy of the capsule note, and collapsed onto the couch, not bothering to remove her boots. She slept fitfully, dreaming of the cave, the voices, her boys' blurred faces, their hands reaching for her through the mist. She woke to a pounding on her door, the sound jarring her from a dream, where she was running through Blackthorn Ridge, her boys' laughter just out of reach. Ivy Wren stood on the porch, her face pale, her dark curls tangled, a newspaper clutched in her trembling hands. Mara, you need to see this, she said, thrusting the paper forward, her voice tight with urgency. The Tarsith Tribune headline screamed, "Local man found dead in Montana cabin." The article, written by Jasper Cole, described Rowan Kessler's death, ruled a suicide, a single gunshot wound to the head,
discovered by a deputy sent to question him about the Carver case. Mara's heart sank, her hands trembling as she read, the words blurring through tears. Rowan was gone, his secrets buried with him. The article mentioned a note left behind, addressed to Mara, its contents brief, but devastating. "I'm sorry, I couldn't stop it. The Ridge takes what it wants." Mara's knees buckled, and Ivy caught her, guiding her to a chair at the kitchen table.
What does it mean?
Ivy asked, her voice trembling, her hands hovering as if unsure how to comfort her. "It means he knew more than he told me," Mara said, her voice hollow, her gaze fixed on the newspaper. "He was afraid, Ivy. He said the Ridge was alive, that it took people. Now it's taken him too." Ivy sat across from her, her eyes wide with fear and determination. "We can't let this go, Mara. The journal, the cave, Rowan's sketches. There's a pattern, a truth we're close to. I'll keep digging in the library archive. There might be more about the Ridge, about whoever wrote that journal." Mara nodded, grateful for Ivy's resolve, though her own felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter. "Be careful," she said, echoing Rowan's warning. "This isn't just a mystery, it's dangerous." The investigation deepened over the following weeks, a slow, grinding process that tested Mara's patience. Lena's team found the cave, confirming Mara's account, its entrance hidden by vines, its chamber exactly as she'd described. The symbols were photographed, sent to experts in archaeology and linguistics, who called them pre-human, possibly linked to ancient rituals, though their origins remained elusive. The journal was sent to a lab in Seattle, its ink and paper dated to the early 1960s, predating Rowan's birth by decades. The altar stains were confirmed as human blood, but too degraded for DNA analysis, their age impossible to pinpoint. The cave was sealed with concrete and steel, declared a geological hazard, but Mara knew it wasn't over. The Ridge wasn't done, its presence lingering in her dreams, in the whispers she sometimes heard in the wind. Mara met with Lena regularly, poring over reports, chasing leads, their meetings a ritual of shared grief and determination. Lena shared her own connection to the Ridge. Clara Voss, her aunt, had been her hero, a free-spirited woman who loved the mountains, whose disappearance in 1977 had shaped Lena's life. "I joined the force because of her," Lena said one evening, her voice soft over coffee in her office. "I thought I could find her, or at least stop it from happening again. But the Ridge, it's like it's mocking us." Jasper Cole's articles grew increasingly sensational, fueling the town's unease. He wrote of cults hiding in the mountains, of conspiracies involving the scout troop, even accusing Gideon Hale of negligence in 1997, claiming he'd failed to secure the Capsule. Gideon, overwhelmed by the scrutiny, left Eldridge, his house boarded up, his name whispered with suspicion at the Pineview Diner, and the Rusty Anchor. Mara confronted Jasper one day outside the Tribune office, her anger flaring. "You're turning this into a circus," she said, her voice sharp. "My boys aren't a story for you to sell." Jasper's smile was disarming, but his eyes were calculating. "I'm just doing my job, Mara. People deserve the truth. Don't you want to know what happened? I want answers, not headlines," she snapped, walking away, her hands clenched. But his words lingered, a nagging doubt. Was he digging for truth, or exploiting her pain? Ivy's research bore fruit, uncovering references to Blackthorn Ridge in old settler journals from the 1800s, stored in the library's basement. The journals described whispers in the pines, of people vanishing during hunts, of lights flickering in the cliffs at night. One entry, dated 1853, spoke of a stone circle deep in the ridge, where a trapper had seen shapes that weren't men dancing in the moonlight. Ivy showed Mara the journal, her hands trembling. "This sounds like your cave," she said. "It's been there for centuries, taking people." Mara's skin prickled, the pieces falling into place, though the picture was still incomplete. "Who wrote the journal we found? Who knew about my boys before they were born?" Ivy shook her head, her curls bouncing. "I don't know, but I found something else. A record of a man named Elias Wren, my great-uncle, who lived here in the 1960s. He was a recluse, lived near the ridge, and disappeared. People said he was obsessed with the mountains, always sketching them. What if he wrote the journal?" Mara's heart raced. "Your great-uncle, why didn't you mention him before?" I didn't know, Ivy said, her voice breaking. My family never talked about it. He was the black sheep, shunned for his crazy stories. But if he was like Rowan, seeing things, maybe he's part of this. Mara and Ivy spent days researching Elias Wren, finding scraps of his life, a few sketches in the library's collection, eerie depictions of the ridge, similar to Rowan. A newspaper clipping from 1964 mentioned Elias's arrest for trespassing near the ridge, claiming he was protecting the town from something in the cliffs. His cabin, long abandoned, was still standing, hidden in the woods near Blackthorn Ridge. Mara convinced Lena to search it, hoping for answers. The search was grim. The cabin was a ruin, its roof caved in, its walls covered in symbols carved into the wood, matching those in the cave. Inside they found a rusted tin containing letters, written in the same scrawl as the journal, addressed to no one, describing visions of children lost to the light. One letter mentioned Theo and Levi by name, dated 1963, 34 years before Theo's birth. Mara read it, her hands shaking, her stomach churning. Elias had known, somehow, just as Rowan had. But how? And why? Lena's team found no trace of Elias's body, but a trapdoor led to a small cellar, its walls lined with more sketches, some depicting the cave's altar, others showing blurred figures, like the ones Mara had seen. A single bone, human, was found in the dirt, too old for identification, but it sent a chill through Mara. Was it Elias's, or another victim of the ridge? The discoveries fueled Mara's determination, but they also fractured Eldridge Hollow. The town grew tense, the capsule's discovery a wound that refused to heal. At the Rusty Anchor, arguments erupted over the ridge's curse, some blaming old families like the Hales or Wrens, others calling for the trails to be closed permanently. The Pineview Diner buzzed with rumors, cults, government cover-ups, even aliens. Jasper's articles fanning the flames. Mara avoided the diner, the bar, the park, her world narrowing to her house, the station and Ivy's library, where she pored over every scrap of evidence, her eyes burning from lack of sleep. One evening, Mara returned to Eldridge Park, where the capsule had been unearthed. The hole was filled, the grass replanted, but she sat on a bench, the mitten and shoe in her lap, their weight a quiet comfort. She closed her eyes, imagining Theo and Levi beside her, Theo explaining the stars' patterns, Levi chasing fireflies. She didn't believe in curses, but she felt the ridge's pull, its hunger, a presence that had taken her boys, Clara, Rowan, Elias, and countless others. It wouldn't take her though. She'd keep searching, not for their bodies, she knew they were gone, but for the truth, for closure, for a way to honor their memory. Lena called her that night, her voice heavy. We got a report from the lab. The journal's ink has traces of a rare mineral, found only in the Tarsith Mountain. It's like whoever wrote it was using the ridge itself to mark those names. And the symbols, they're not just art, they're a language, but no one can translate it. The experts say it's older than anything they've seen. Mara's heart sank, the truth slipping further away. So what now? We keep looking, Lena said, her resolve mirroring Mara's. But Mara, I'm worried about you. You're carrying this alone. Let me help. You are helping, Mara said, her voice soft. Just don't stop. Months passed, the investigation a slow grind, each lead a thread that unraveled into more questions. Mara organized a new vigil, not just for Theo and Levi, but for all the ridge's victims, Clara, Amos, the Morrows, Elias, Rowan, and others whose names were lost to time. She spent weeks planning, coordinating with Lena, Ivy and community leaders, determined to turn the town's fear into unity. The vigil was held in Eldridge Park, under a sky heavy with stars, hundreds gathering with candles, their flames a defiance against the dark. Lena spoke first, her voice steady, promising answers, her badge glinting in the candlelight. We've lost too many to Blackthorn Ridge, she said, her eyes meeting Mara's. But we won't forget them. We'll keep searching for them. Ivy read a poem she'd written, its words a balm for the town's grief, her voice trembling but clear. In the pines where shadows fall, their voices linger, soft and small. We light the dark, we hold the flame, and whisper back each stolen name. Mara stood last, her hands clutching the mitten and shoe, her voice raw but strong. Theo and Levi were my heart, she said, tears streaming down her face. They loved this town, these mountains, even when they took them. I don't know why they're gone, but I know they'd want us to live, to love, to keep going. This vigil is for them, for all who've been lost. We carry them with us, always. The crowd was silent, their candles flickering, their faces etched with shared grief. Even Jasper Cole attended, his notebook closed, his expression somber, a rare moment of humanity breaking through his ambition. As the vigil ended, people lingered, sharing stories of the lost, Clara's laughter, Amos's kindness, the Morrow's teenage dream. Mara listened, her heart heavy but warm, the community's strength, a lifeline. As the crowd dispersed, Mara stayed, her candles flamed steady. Despite the breeze, she felt a presence, not the ridge's malice, but something softer, like a hand on her shoulder, a whisper of Theo's logic, Levi's joy. She smiled through tears, whispering, "I love you boys, forever brothers." She walked home, the mitten and shoe in her bag, her steps lighter despite the weight. The ridge was silent, its secrets buried deep, but Mara's resolve was unbroken. The truth might never come fully to light, its edges too ancient, too vast, but she'd carry her boys with her, their memory a flame no darkness could extinguish. She'd live for them, fight for them, until the Tarseth mountains themselves crumbled, her love a beacon against the ridge's eternal hunger.